This video contains descriptions of real violent crimes, grave desecration, and severe psychological disturbance. The content may be distressing for some viewers. I do not glorify or romanticize violence, and I do not present this man as a hero or an icon. The purpose of this video is educational and psychological, to understand how such a mind may be formed, and what factors can lead to extreme pathology. If topics like murder, death, or mental illness are triggering for you, please consider whether you want to continue watching. Your emotional safety matters more than any video. This is a story of Ed Gein, a quiet farmer from a small American town who looked harmless from the outside, while inside his world was collapsing into one of the darkest cases in criminal history. Edmund Emil Gein was born on August 27, 1906, near La Crosse, Wisconsin. He was born into a family with two parents, but psychologically, only one truly existed for him. His father, George Gein, was a weak and broken man. He struggled to hold a job, drifted between work in a tannery, carpentry, and running a small saloon, and he drank heavily. He was often described as angry, passive, and defeated. For young Ed, his father was not a model of strength or stability. He was a figure of fear, contempt, and emotional distance. His mother, Augusta, was the opposite in almost every way. She was rigid, controlling, and fanatically religious. She believed the world was soaked in sin. People were corrupt, weak, and lost. She reserved particular hatred for women she saw as sexually loose or immoral. In her eyes, sexuality was dirty, pleasure was dangerous, and the body was something to be tightly controlled and heavily shamed. When Ed was about 8 years old, the family moved to a remote farm near the small town of Plainfield, Wisconsin. Surrounded by fields, marshes, and woods, the farm became their private world, or their private prison. Augusta wanted to keep her sons, Ed and his older brother Henry, away from what she called the evil of other people. Contact with other children was limited. Friendships were discouraged. Any connection outside the family, especially romantic or sexual, was painted as a path to ruin. During the day, the boys worked on the farm. In the evenings, Augusta gathered them for Bible readings. But instead of focusing on love, mercy, or forgiveness, she favored passages full of punishment, wrath, and judgment. She spoke often about the wickedness of the world, the filth of sexual desire, and the corruption of women. For a sensitive boy who longed for warmth, her words were not just lessons. They were programming. They became the foundation of his inner reality. At school, Ed was quiet, shy, and often the target of teasing. He had a strange laugh that would sometimes escape at odd moments, as if he was reacting to something only he could hear. Teachers later described him as odd, withdrawn, but not openly aggressive. His social skills never fully developed. He did not know how to build healthy relationships with peers. Instead, he retreated deeper into books and his inner world. He liked reading crime magazines, adventure stories, and later material about anatomy and war. His older brother, Henry, slowly began to resist their mother's worldview. Henry questioned Augusta's preaching, sought a more ordinary life, and sometimes criticized her in conversations with Ed. For most people, this would be normal family conflict. For Ed, it was almost blasphemy. His emotional life was completely fused with his mother. She was his moral code, his God, his protector, and the only source of emotional warmth. To criticize her was to threaten the core of his identity. In 1940, Ed's father, George, died from complications related to alcoholism. The family, already isolated, now became even smaller and more insular. The household shrank to 3 figures, mother and 2 sons. In 1944, something happened that still raises questions today. A fire broke out in a marshy area near the farm. Ed said he and Henry were fighting the fire when they became separated. Later that day, Henry's body was found face down. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure, possibly brought on by the exertion and smoke. Some observers later pointed to bruises on his head, suggesting possible foul play. No charges were ever brought. No thorough investigation followed. Whether Henry's death was a tragic accident or something darker, the result was the same. Ed was left alone with his mother. Soon after, Augusta suffered a stroke. Ed took care of her, and his attachment to her grew even more intense. He waited on her, listened to her, and absorbed her judgments about the world. After a second stroke, she died in December 1945. For the outside world, this was a natural death of an older woman in rural America. For Ed, it was the end of his universe. He reportedly said after her death, "I had no one." His mother had been his entire emotional world, his external conscience, his connection to meaning. With her gone, something inside him did not simply break. It disintegrated. Psychologists later refer to this period as a time of pathological grief. Instead of moving through a painful but natural mourning process, Ed's mind turned inward and downward. Loneliness, repressed sexual urges, religious shame, and signs of psychosis began to mix together. After her death, he sealed Augusta's bedroom and kept it almost perfectly preserved. Dust did not gather there. The furniture remained neat. It became something like a shrine. Meanwhile, the rest of the house decayed into chaos. Piles of newspapers and magazines, trash, dirt, and clutter spread through the rooms. One space froze in time, controlled and untouched, representing his idealized image of his mother. The rest of the house mirrored his mental collapse. On the surface, Ed became the quiet, slightly strange man from town. He worked as a handyman. He did odd jobs, repaired things, and sometimes babysat neighbors' children. People in Plainfield described him as odd but harmless, maybe a little slow, but friendly enough. No one imagined what was happening inside his home or in his mind. After Augusta's death, Ed's fascination with death, the human body, and dark topics grew stronger. He read about grave robbing, cannibalism, medical experiments, and atrocities committed during the Second World War. At some point, his fantasies crossed a line into action. At night, Ed Gein began visiting the local cemetery. He focused on freshly buried graves of women who resembled his mother in age and appearance. Later investigations confirmed that several graves had been disturbed. Coffins opened, bodies partially removed. He went to the cemetery alone, opened graves, and took bodies or body parts back to his farm. What happened next has been described in many sources, often with too much sensational detail. We do not need graphic description to understand how disturbed his behavior was. What matters is a pattern. He used human remains to create objects and artifacts that, in his mind, brought him closer to the female body and to the image of his mother. At his farmhouse, Ed fashioned household items from bone and skin. He made masks from human faces. He crafted pieces of clothing from human skin. Some reports and later testimony suggest that he would sometimes put these items on, walk around the house, and imagine himself as a woman, or as his mother. He described some of this as a way to feel close to her again, as if he could temporarily escape his loneliness and step back into a world where she still existed through these disturbing rituals. In addition to grave robbing and desecration, Ed committed at least 2 confirmed murders. In 1954, Mary Hogan, the owner of a local tavern, disappeared. There was blood at the scene, but no body. The case went unsolved for years. Some townspeople remember that Ed had made strange comments, like joking that Mary was at his place. People laughed it off as dark humor. No one took it seriously. Then, on November 16, 1957, Bernice Wardens, the owner of a hardware store in Plainfield, went missing. Her son returned to find blood on the floor and the cash register missing. A sales slip showed that the last customer had been Ed Gein. The police went to his farm. What they found inside became one of the most infamous crime scenes in American history. They discovered Bernice Warden's body in a shed, along with numerous objects made from human remains throughout the house and outbuildings. In his house, investigators found chairs upholstered with human skin, bowls made from skulls, masks created from faces, and a kind of vest or torso-like garment sewn from the skin of women. Ed admitted that he sometimes put these pieces on and walked around the house, imagining himself as a woman or as his mother. For him, this was a disturbed attempt to feel close, not just to death, but to the body and identity he could never safely approach in life. Later, Ed confessed killing both Bernice Wardens and Mary Hogan, and to digging up multiple graves over the years. The details were so disturbing that they shocked even experienced law enforcement officers. But for our purposes, the important point is that Ed's private world, grief, isolation, Sexual shame, religious fear, and mental illness had combined into a pattern of behavior that turned death into a twisted form of companionship. After his arrest, psychiatrists evaluated Ed Gein. They found evidence of severe mental illness, psychotic episodes, distorted perceptions, and a deeply disorganized personality. He was diagnosed with conditions consistent with schizophrenia or a related psychotic disorder, along with profound disturbances in his emotional development and identity. His psychological profile can be seen as a convergence of several powerful forces. First, there was his extreme dependence on his mother. His attachment to her was anxious, fused, and never allowed to mature into an adult separation. He never developed a stable sense of self outside of her approval and her worldview. Second, there was the intense social isolation. He had almost no meaningful relationships outside his immediate family. He did not learn how to relate to others as equals. He did not experience mutual romantic or sexual relationships. The world of other people remained strange, distant, and threatening. Third, there were likely underlying psychotic vulnerabilities. His imagination, his fantasies, and his beliefs began to blend. He developed obsessions and rituals that he treated as if they were necessary or meaningful, even when they were deeply distorted. He had difficulty separating inner imagery from outer reality. Fourth, the moral and religious framework he grew up in was extremely rigid and shaming. Natural sexual feelings were labeled as filthy and sinful. Women were portrayed as dangerous temptations. Instead of learning to integrate desire in a healthy way, he learned to fear it, deny it, and push it into the shadows of his mind. When repressed desire mixed with death, grief, and psychosis, it emerged in a grotesque and disturbing form. Psychiatrists described him as having pathological grief, severe personality disorganization, and regression to primitive forms of thinking and relating. He did not simply miss his mother. A part of his mind tried to recreate her presence through objects made from human remains, and through rituals that blurred the line between self and other. In court, Ed Gein was found not guilty by reason of insanity. He was declared legally insane and sent to a secure psychiatric hospital instead of a standard prison. Staff who worked with him later described him as quiet, polite, sometimes almost childlike. He liked reading magazines and doing simple tasks. There was a chilling contrast between his calm demeanor and the horror of his actions. He spent the rest of his life in psychiatric institutions. Ed Gein died on July 26, 1984, from complications related to cancer in a mental health facility in Wisconsin. His story went on to influence popular culture. Characters in horror films and novels, such as Norman Bates in Psycho, Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs, were all, in different ways, inspired by elements of Ed Gein's case. But movies often strip away the psychological complexity and turn the horror into spectacle. If we look at his life through a psychological lens, we do not see a supernatural monster. We see a human being whose psyche was profoundly deformed by a combination of factors: an authoritarian, shaming, and isolating upbringing, a weak, unavailable father, a dominating, fanatical mother, social isolation, unprocessed grief, and serious mental illness that went untreated and unrecognized until it was too late. This does not mean that everyone who has a strict parent, or who grows up isolated, or who suffers psychosis, will commit crimes. Most people with similar risk factors do not become killers. But Ed Gein's life shows what can happen when multiple layers of vulnerability stack on top of each other with no intervention, no support, and no healthy relationships to counterbalance them. This video is not meant to shock you for entertainment. It is meant to invite reflection on how early environments, shame, isolation, and untreated mental illness can shape a mind in catastrophic ways. If you feel heavy after listening to this, that is a natural response. Take a moment to breathe. Notice your body. Return your attention to ordinary, grounding sensations, the feeling of the chair beneath you, the sounds in your room, the presence of people you trust. Understanding the darkness is not about living inside it. It is about recognizing the conditions that create it, so that we can be more careful with the worlds we build for children, for each other, and for ourselves. If this kind of psychological documentary content resonates with you, you can support the channel in a simple but very important way. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It helps the algorithm show these videos to more people who might need this kind of deep, reflective content. You can also share it with someone who is interested in true crime, psychology, or the darker corners of the human mind. Thank you for being here, for your attention, and for helping this channel grow.